am not happy about this being the penultimate episode of Land of the Lustrous. I feel like I just started this series. I feel like it's gone by super fast, and I'm not ready to be done with the anime. Not at all. I do want to read the manga. I definitely do. I will go ahead and tell everybody as we start this video, it's Romania Black, and we're on episode 11 of Land of the Lustrous. I do plan on reading the manga, as you probably have seen on my schedule for this month, as you've probably seen in my January update video that I've done. If you've not, go check that out. But there are a lot of series on this channel that I'm doing, a lot of extras that I'm doing this month, and so I am going to read the manga, but I will go ahead and let you all know, my spring this year in particular as a coach, which is one of my other jobs outside of this channel, is going to be very busy. And so I'm trying to kind of tone down the channel and get to watching back to like 7 or 8 shows, hopefully by spring, because I need to allot time to record ahead because of how much travel I'm going to do. So I'm planning on reading the manga, but is it going to be every Saturday after episode 12 next week? I would like it to be, but I'm not going to make any guarantees. So please be patient with me. I would love to get to each volume and look through the manga. What I would probably do is I will go online without getting into spoilers. Trust me, I'm very keen on spoilers, so you don't have to worry about me accidentally spoiling myself. I'll be very thorough, but I'm going to see like exactly when the anime cuts off. I will go back and read up to that point on my own, because I'm not going to react to manga that you've just watched me do the anime for. I'm not going to do that. And so then once we get to the point where it gets caught up, I'll talk about that manga and kind of highlight things for you and then pick up where it leaves off at. So that's my plan. But with my schedule, I'm not going to guarantee that it's going to start the week after next, but it is going to be my goal this spring. So it is going to be once I set my mind to a goal, I do want to do it, but I also want to be transparent with you all that it might not be every single Saturday. So I would like it to be, but we'll just play it by ear and go from there. I'm trying to set myself to realistic goals so I don't drive myself crazy with anxiety trying to get things on time, especially for a manga reaction. So hopefully you all stick around and check out the manga reactions on the Saturdays that they do happen this spring. Hopefully it'll be every Saturday, but we'll just play it by ear. So, and I'll always let everybody know in the Discord over on Patreon if there's delays and things like that. So if you do want to be, my shameless plug is if you want to spend $1 a month, a measly dollar, that's less than a candy bar, that you can join my Patreon and be in the Discord and talk about Land of the Lustrous and other shows whilst you wait on those manga reactions. But yeah, so I have a few comments before we start episode 11. I've been trying to hold back, but then I have to watch to stay on time. So it's like, but I've been trying to hold back and savor these episodes, let me tell you. But episode 11, with episode 8, Icon said that in the jellyfish in the bowl, Phos was getting some extra light to help from exhaustion, which makes sense of why they use the jellyfish for light. It's kind of like photosynthesis when you see like plants under a light getting that energy from the natural light when it's not available, or from artificial light when the natural light's not available. And then this is something to notice with cultural context that's never really brought up in the series. The gyms during hibernation, the kimonos that they wear are folded in the manner for dead people's kimonos. Well, that adds a creepy context to it. And it's a creepy context that when they're in hibernation, they're posed like dead people, and then they're literally the Walking Dead. Well, that's interesting. We'll do with that what we can. So thank you, Icon, for pointing that out. Alexandra Q said with episode 8, with Phos's arms, they gain them back, but at what cost? It does bring to mind the question if all the gemstones are as compatible with other materials, or if this is a Phos-only quality, maybe because of their gemstone. I don't know. The series has not told us anything, so we don't want to be spoilery, and we want to wait and see what the show gives us. I don't know. I assumed that, and I've said this in previous discussions, I assumed that it's just something that could happen to all of the gemstones, that they all have that capability. The question though, like Antarcticite actually says in the episode, they're like, oh, it's malleable and everything, but it just depends on if you're compatible or not. So it could take to the gemstones or it could not. It might be an individual basis like people are. Some people are compatible with certain organs being like an organ donation. Others reject them. So I don't know. I also think that it could be the gems all have the ability to do like Phos, but one of the things we've talked about thematically is stagnation, and how even though the gemstones have been around for so long, they kind of just get set in their ways and they don't want to branch out and change. And so they're stagnant. And we'll talk about that here more in a second. But I think that that could be something to do with it too. They don't want to embrace the possibility that they could incorporate other materials. Now, Daya just lost a bunch of arms and legs and half their face in this last episode. So are they going to be able to collect all of that and piece Daya back together? Or would Daya have to try to like incorporate new materials? It's kind of funny because Daya seems like the one character other than Phos that seems the most apt and open to change. So that might be something interesting. We'll just have to see where that goes, right? But it makes me wonder if there are other parts of humanity that were divided in that could also fuse with other materials and beings, or if this quality is unique to the bones and what that can mean for humanity. Well, the last episode, we see this weird squirrel hybrid with the Lunarians, and we know that the Lunarians have been kind of farming out the organic materials and the organic members. Presumably, I thought that it was kind of obvious when they said that they wanted humanity to all come back together. I thought that meant fusing everybody back together into one being, which sounds Frankensteinish and terrifying. And as we've learned from series like Full Metal Alchemist, doesn't work the way you think it's going to work and is a bad idea. But we'll see what the series gives us as we go. We'll see what the series gives us. But thank you, Alexandra Q, for the comment. Moomin finally says, I don't know how to feel about the question of, and this relates to episode 8, why we exist and what is the point? Have I got an answer to this philosophical question? Well, I don't think that this is the question one should ask. I think the focus should be smaller, more personal of a question. What meaning do we bring to our lives and to others around us through our actions? To me, we only have control over our own lives to an extent. Yeah, isn't that the question of the hour? And I like the idea because Phos and Daya seem to be wanting to make these big changes within themselves, but then to Moomin's point, the point isn't to make these big giant overarching changes, it's to do little things and influence other people's lives in little ways. And I feel like Phos, for example, with Cinnabar, keeps wanting to do this big revolutionary thing and find Cinnabar this big revolutionary way to live. But meanwhile, Cinnabar is slowly altering themselves in little tiny ways. It doesn't seem like it, but they are kind of more receptive to Phos just from their interactions. So Phos is making an impact with Cinnabar. They just don't think that they are because it's not immediately noticeable. We don't get that instant gratification. So I do think that that's really worthy to point out. And then Moomin says that it is part of the journey of life to change. To remain unchanged means we are stagnant and we've learned nothing. Change is important. I was thinking about my earliest memories and I've long since forgotten them. Every night we go to sleep and our brain forgets things, so it has room to learn new things. Of course, we're not gyms, but we forget all the time. Humans are crap at remembering anything. So that was actually really reassuring because the last few episodes I've been really concerned with the fact that Phos forgets things and has to be reminded of things, because to me, from a narrative standpoint, it feels like it's showing like degradation of them and they're changing in a way that kind of compromises who they once were. But Moomin's comment kind of makes me feel better about that, being like, well, no, it's not. It's okay to forget certain things as long as what's important to you isn't forgotten. Memory in narrative is such a key thing for me, and I think that relates to my own fears about like losing memory that's permanent. And so I do think that that's really important to bring up and talk about. But I hope you all still keep commenting, because even after next week, when we get into the manga, I will take your comments from the anime and bring them over to the manga to talk about there. So I do hope that you all keep commenting, because I want to keep checking those moments out. So yeah, I've talked for nearly 10 minutes and we're going to go ahead and start episode 11. But y'all, I'm just kind of floored that we're already to the penultimate episode and I don't know how to feel about that. So what can we do though? We have to move forward. So we're going to start episode 11 of Land of the Lustrous, and we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1. And let's go. Ooh, this did not feel like the penultimate episode of a season. It most certainly did not. This did not feel like that at all. This felt like just a regular episode. I mean, there were elements with Adamant that I was like, okay, we're leading up to something, but the way that it was set up, I'm like, I don't know if we're obviously not going to get answers in the next episode. And we're going to talk about this episode and just the parts of it, but just introducing this new character in the 11th hour, it would make sense because of the manga, because the manga is probably going to go more into detail with Pad. I'm going to call them Pad because their name is really long. And I was like, that looks like a tongue twister. I'm not going to try that because I know how I am with pronunciation. So we're going to call them Pad, Red Pad. Or Red Panda, whichever works. They have the holes. It kind of looks like a red panda. Humor me. Anyway, we introduced a brand new character in the 11th hour, and I was like, okay, and introduced new things, which would make sense in the manga because the manga is going to obviously expand upon those characters and Rutail's relationship with them and all of that. But aside from like some things with Adamant, this episode being called Secret, there are secrets being kept. I'm very curious about what the manga is going to give us now. I feel like, I know that people talk about different seasons of like, whenever there's a 12 episode season, especially for a series like this where the manga had been ongoing at the time. I know a lot of people use the phrase like it's a manga bait series because you watch these 12 episodes and you're like, oh my God, I want to know more. And it baits you into going off and reading the manga, which is seemingly intentional. Now, I say that, and there are other series like Skip and Loafer that just got, a second season added, and then there's like Windbreaker and some others that I want to see that I've been told were like 12 episodes, and then they've got a new season added onto them. So that's not necessarily the case, but you think of series like Yona of the Dawn, which I'm almost done reading the manga and waiting for that second season. You think of Hanako-kun, who just now got renewed for a second season, but it's been years and I've been reading the manga. You think of a series like, I don't know. I think of Millionaire Detective, which that's anime only. But anyway, there are series that I've watched where it's been like after the 12th episode, I'm like, Uramichi Onisan is the most recent that I could think of that. Like Uramichi Onisan, that 12 episode series ends and you're like, but it doesn't feel like an ending. I want to go read more. And that's kind of the intent of it. So I am glad that I'm going on and reading the manga after this season, because my one fear, before we start talking about this episode, my one fear, and I don't want y'all to tell me yes or no on this, we'll find out next week, and I'll have it recorded before you see this episode for a reason. But my theory is that this is going to be like with the series I talked about last week, where it's going to end in a definitive way that may not be reflective of the manga, because the creators were like, well, we got to end the season somehow. Here's an ending, and it may be anime only and not how it is in the manga. That is my expectation, but we'll see how that goes. Either I feel like it's going to go one of two ways. Either they're going to make up an ending for the season to kind of give it a definitive, ambiguous ending, and it's not going to be what it actually is in reality with the manga, or they're going to do like Uramichi Onisan and just be like, here's an ending and the season's over and tune in next time, except, it's been 8 years. Kind of like that, right? Kind of like that. I feel like that too. I think I just finished March Comes In Like a Lion, and it's sort of the same way, where the manga's ongoing, but the studio hasn't done the next season yet, and you're like, So I feel like it's going to be either one of those two things. That helps me go into it going, okay, whatever happens next week happens. I've still got the manga to go to from there, right? Cool. Great. But I was really coming into this episode, especially once we saw it, because here's the thing. I have been given the files. Liam Poles has hooked me up with these files. So thank you, Liam Poles, on Patreon. But the files just say Hoseki no Kuni, which is Land of the Lustrous, and then the number of the episode. There's no title. So it's not like I'm going to a streaming service and seeing a thumbnail, or going to a streaming service and seeing which usually, just FYI, usually when I go into series, I try not to look at the title. I try to just click on the episode and go from there. It's hard sometimes, but I try to do it just so I can be surprised to see what the episode is. Sometimes I do accidentally see it and I'm like, oh, okay. But for the most part, it's nice with these files because you don't get any clues. You just show up and it's like, oh, that's it. Oh, okay. And it's kind of nice. I like using files because it feels like I'm watching a show like for the first time, like on TV. So it's kind of fun. Back in the day when we just had television shows that came on, you didn't have streaming services, it feels very nostalgic in a good way. But yeah, once I saw the word secret, I was like, ooh, what we gonna get? And just like a secret. But here's the thing, we're gonna tie that to Antarcticide's like shush, like, and all of that. This episode did not go the way that I thought it would. Which, here's the thing. What's so interesting is that the creature, Shiro, which that was the name of last episode, and I was like, Shiro? What the heck does that have to do with anything? But we get it now. Shiro is the name of the being. Which Shiro, doesn't Shiro mean white, I think, in a way, which like snow or fluffy, which goes along with the fact that it keeps like getting smaller and smaller. What's interesting is, I want to bring out White Raccoon. So we have Shiro, which is very dog coded as a spirit, and it gets smaller and bigger based on it, and it seems to also be a spirit. It's connected to the master, connected to Adamant, and Adamant says that it passes on. It passes on or is at peace. Okay, we're gonna come back to that. We're going to come back to that at some point. I love the reveal that Alex kind of hulks out whenever they get involved with Lunarians. I wanted to, Alexandrite, I wanted to go to the stone. It says it's a color change variety of the mineral chrysoberyl. It's green by day, and it's bluish green in daylight or fluorescent light, and red by night. And it's purplish red and incandescent with candlelight. That's kind of cool. I like that they took that. They took that kind of setup of that it changes colors and do like the night and day thing. And then they made it like a Hulk out thing where whenever Alex or Lexi sees which now makes sense now, they call them Alex and then they also call them Lexi, split personalities. I like that the aspects of it as a gemstone kind of determined its personality and whether Alex or Lexi comes out to be represented there. That's probably one of the reasons why a lot of people, when I first started watching this series, they're like, don't look up too much information about the stones themselves because they could reveal like plot points or spoiler things. And I was like, okay, I won't do that. Well, now it makes sense because if I had looked up that on Alexandrite and been like, oh, well, will they change colors? It would be like, no, they're going to use it as like kind of a Hulk moment where Alex becomes someone different in a certain situation. So I'm like, okay, that's kind of cool. I like that's incorporated into the story. But yeah, but here's the thing. This creature, Shiro, could have at any moment grabbed them all and taken them with them. But that didn't seem to be the case. Instead, it almost seemed like it was trying to like get up next to them and then find Adamant, and it's interesting. I love Red Alex. I love it. And then the fact, I also love that Phos was able to use their golden platinum arms to kind of do some good, to like use them as sort of Stretch Armstrong things to get everybody there. Also, something else that was pointed out, and it was kind of foreshadowed when Bort was like, oh, look, it's Red Alex. And Phos is like, Red Alex? And Bort's like, yeah, they've always been like this. And whenever that's why they can only see, it's almost like they can't directly be in contact with Lunarians or they lose their mind. So instead they get to like experience like them vicariously through the reports. They get their fix of Lunarians by writing reports about them instead of interacting head on with them. I'm like, that's kind of cool. I like that. That's a clever writing thing. But I also forget in the series that Phos is the youngest. So that is something to do with this, that Phos is, and these markers are going to have to go after this video. Phos is the youngest. They are the youngest of the stones. So by that, they know naturally the least. But what's interesting is Phos is 300 years old. So you would think by this point they would have figured some things out. But again, the stones have gotten pretty stagnant and complacent in their lives. So anything that's happened in the past before Phos came around that they were like, oh, this happened and we learned this, but we've just kind of shoved it out of sight, out of mind. Phos wouldn't know that unless they asked and the gems offered up that information. So we'll put Adamant up here because they're up here. Adamant knows about the Lunarians. That much is very clear. They know about the Lunarians. They're protecting the gems. But the Lunarians are insistent on wanting them. Alexander Q pointed out in their comment from episode 8 that Adamant doesn't really And I've talked about this in the discussion. Adamant doesn't look anything like the other gems, and they don't seem to be forged out of the same material as the other gems. They have access to the gem like powers because they shoot the little bits of themselves. We assume it's bits of themselves to fight, but Adamant definitely knows secret knowledge. And some people have commented about like trying to figure out Adamant and how they are. I think Adamant comes from a place of good. I feel like I've got some theories about them, but I'm going to wait a little bit till we get further into the episode. I feel like Adamant comes from a place of good, but in that respect, they are still withholding information from Phos intentionally. And Phos, we're going to talk about them with Antarcticide as we go. But I did not anticipate this Lunarian becoming like the Gremlins, becoming like Gizmo, just 1,000 gizmos. So cute though, so marketable. I don't blame Red Barrel for making the little plushies of them. That is so freaking cute. And I just love, I will give Studio Orange all of the credit in the animation because the way that they're fluffy and like pillow-like, they just feel like little balls of cotton candy on the screen. They feel like they're so lightweight and like a feather. But then they have enough dexterity to them that when Rutile pelts Phos with them, they're just boop, boop. Like, they just, you can feel the depth and the texture of them in this environment. And it's so freaking good. Like, Studio Orange outdid themselves in this series. It looks really amazing. I wish they got more credit because it really does look good. I love that shot of Bort and Phos just covered with the different versions of Shiro. Also, Bort's feet, their poor, their tights have slowly become worn out too because they lost their shoes. But yeah, they all go looking for the master. They all go looking for Adamant. And everybody's just running around trying to gather them all up. There's like 100 and... said there was 107 that they counted, or which would be 108 if you counted. I feel like the number 108 is significant, isn't it? I feel like I've seen that number before. 108... is there a number? 108 is sacred in many cultures and has mystical meanings. Yeah. Okay. It's the atomic number of haecium, and the distance from the Earth to the sun is 108 times the diameter of the sun. Yeah, I knew that the number 108 has importance. I was like, it's also the hyperfactorial of the number 3, since you keep on changing it. It's an Achilles number because it's a powerful number, but not a perfect power. Okay, we're going to talk about that. In Hinduism, here we go. Yes, number 108. In Hindu tradition, the Mukhya Shivaganas, attendants of Shiva, are 108 in number, and hence Shaiva religions, particularly Lingayats, use malas of 108 beads for prayer and meditation. Similarly, and I'm going to mispronounce this, so I'm sorry, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Lord Krishna in Brindavan had 108 followers known as gopis. Recital of their names, often accompanied by the counting of 108 beaded mala, is done during religious ceremonies. Well, that would seem to tie to the whole Hindu elements that seem to be with the Lunarians and that whole connection to Adamant, who's literally in a priest's garb, right? Okay. Then it says with Buddhism, according to Bhante Gunaratana, this number is reached by multiplying the senses of smell, touch, taste, sight, hearing, and consciousness by whether they are painful, pleasant, or neutral, and then again by whether these are internally generated or externally occurring, and yet again by past, present, and future, and finally we get 108 feelings. Thus, number 108 represents all the possible sensory states that one could experience. And then Tibetan Buddhist malas or rosaries are usually 108 beads, which all the beads come together to make Shiro, which kind of is, I guess you could consider it like a rosary. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. Cool. Nice to know that the number 108 has such significance. And that seems to be how many there were here, right? Because they said 106, because then they said 107 when they put the one in, and we know that one was still missing, which would be 108. Connecting things together, y'all. Connecting things together. I do love how Alex is like, if I just squint at them, okay. But then they reform, but they don't look like malicious with all the gemstones. Instead, they're kind of rough like a dog running around, but it doesn't take any of the gemstones. Like when it grabbed the one, I thought, well, it didn't run off with them, So why is it just sticking around? Why is it hanging around? Also, the version of Phos that is created, the gold version of Phos, that's the decoy, looks like older Phos with the hair coming down, which I don't know if that was intentional or if that's just the version of Phos that they idealized for themselves. But then we see Adamant come over, and Adamant looking over at Shiro, just like how Phos mentioned humans, looks like they've seen a ghost. But then calls them over and does the fist bump with them. Now, obviously the other gemstones, they don't question the fact that Adamant has this relationship with Shiro. And I feel like there's a reason for that, because then Phos says, are you telling me I mistakenly heard you call it Shiro? Because then, as they're cleaning up everything and rebuilding everything, nobody questions anything, which kind of backs up Cinnabar's claim that everybody kind of knows something's going on, but they choose ignorance is bliss, and let's just not know about it. And so meanwhile, Phos is like, well, now wait a minute. I know we're cleaning all this up, but Master, this all was a bit crazy, and you're meaning to tell me that it's perfectly fine. Do you know this creature? And they say no, not at all, which is a lie. The biggest lie. And Phos is like, really? So, I just mistakenly heard you call it Shiro, and then they fall asleep. They nod off. And they're like, oh, well, sorry, but apologies, but the fluffiness is so inviting. It's magnificent, magnificently fluffy. And Phos is like, really? Which I was worried that Shiro was going to gather all the gemstones up, and then that was the trap and run away with them, but didn't end up happening, interestingly enough. So Jade says, is the name thing really that big of a deal? And Phos is like, well, that's not the point. The name isn't the thing that's the problem. It's the fact that he knows the name, but is not saying why or how he knows the name. And I get where Phos is coming from, because they're kind of in the same boat as all of us, the audience. We've been fighting the Lunarians for all this time, but suddenly Shiro being here is perfectly fine, and we're not going to fight him or can't fight him. What's the point? Why is this Lunarian different than all the ones that we fight on a day-to-day basis? What's the deal? And so I get Phos is correct. Like, why are we not questioning this? And then that's when Rutal's like, well, you could ask it yourself. You were able to speak to the slug after all. And Phos is like, well, yeah, but that was a different circumstance. I had parts of the slug's brother fused to my legs, so I could technically look at them because it was, fused into my being. Shiro's not part of my being, so that's not going to work the same. And then Phos trying to remember, well, you're missing what happened to your hand. That's definitely what he said. Maybe I'm overthinking it. No! And then Phos says the way that they spoke to Shiro was more familiar than they speak with us. And I think that that's what grinds Phos maybe the most. Because they don't really talk about it in this episode, but Antarcticite was in love with the Master, like loved and respected the Master so much. And I'm not saying that Adamant didn't love Antarcticite back. I think Adamant loves all the gemstones, cares for all the gemstones, wants to protect all the gemstones. But at the same time all that is happening, in the same way, it's one of those situations where he's protecting them, but at the same time keeping them in the dark. And Phos is like, I don't know if I like being in the dark. I want to know the truth. And I'm like, Phos, I don't know if you can handle the truth. I don't know if any of us are ready to handle the truth, honestly. And we'll talk about the theories with all of that to go. But I think what hurts Phos the most is that this creature that came out of nowhere and is presumably in 300 years, the first time Adamant's seen it, he was more familiar with that creature than he was with the gemstones. And Phos is like, Antarcticite loved you. We all love you. We're fighting for you because we love you. But you just spoke to something you just saw, supposedly for the first time, with more affection and familiarity than you have to us in hundreds of years. That's weird. And why did you do that? And Phos is trying to figure out what the deal is. So then he's like, Master and the Lunarians, what's the deal? And then Phos wonders, did I just think of something unthinkable? What's the connection of Master and Lunarians? And I'm like, I want Phos to kind of question it, honestly. I do. So it's the idea of, we're going to put this up here before I forget about it, of Master and the Lunarians. So then Cinnabar shows up. I love how Cinnabar looks. They just kind of walking up through the night. And Phos like, oh, it's you. And then holding the shoes. I love that Cinnabar is not amused by the puppy. I love that Cinnabar's like, can you give this back to Bort? And then, as always, there is an uncomfortable amount of distance between Phos and Cinnabar, and I want that distance to get closer and closer each episode, but we only have one left, so... Nope. So then Bort's shoes are given back, and this thing too. This isn't Bort's. And this is a piece of Lunarian that showed up today. So then I like that Phos gets a little bit closer and says, I'm feeling the Master is hiding something from us. And Cinnabar's like, oh, you mean like with the Lunarians? And Phos is like, what? How did you know? And Cinnabar's like, we all know. And Cinnabar's like, we just choose. We've all suspected as much, but no one knows the truth. And we choose. They've all made an unspoken agreement to trust the Master no matter what the truth might be. Which definitely adds some religious context to it, because it's the idea of, there definitely is a religious context to that. Because if they view Adamant like a god, like their god, then there's a context like in Christianity where it's like you don't question what God does. You just assume that what God is doing is in your best interest, and that at the end of the day, they're doing it out of love and compassion, and you don't need to question why. It's fine. And it's kind of that blind faith that you follow. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, if that's your spiritual belief. But in this case, it's like, is Adamant a god? Or is Adamant, what is Adamant? Do the Gems view him as a god and they just have blind faith that he's protecting them and they don't need to question the truths because there's no point in them knowing, it wouldn't affect anything? Is that okay that they do that? I mean, if he loves them and it protects them, sure. But if you don't view Adamant as a god and he's just a character that's hiding information and it's played off as that, what does that mean? And that's kind of where Phos is at. Phos is like, well, but I want to know. Like, I want to know the truth. And then Phos is like, well, are you like that? And Cinnabar's like, I'm still deciding. I love that look when Cinnabar looks back at them. The mercury almost looks like stars glittering around them. And they're like, what are you going to do? I like that Cinnabar just kind of questions that. Also, now that I'm looking at it, the dummy that Phos used to try to lure Shira over to them, the hair kind of looks like Cinnabar's. So maybe that was influenced in that. But so I like that Cinnabar is, as per you would think, questioning. They are questioning their role, questioning who they are, all that good stuff. And they are not totally convinced whether they should ask the truth or not. But it kind of works to Cinnabar's advantage because Cinnabar's never there. So Cinnabar not asking the Master or being tempted to ask Adamant kind of works in their favor. They can just say, I'm still thinking about it, but I've not made any decisions. We'll see where it goes. But Phos is around Adamant all the time. They are around the other gemstones. And I like the idea that as the wind blows through around them and the world, like, it all turns green. Like green with the moonlight. And Phos is like, I want to know the truth. And this feels like a moment where everything kind of shatters around Phos for a second. And I love the way that the animation kind of physically shows that, because Phos has always had this pristine image of Adamant, that he can do no wrong, that he's perfect. And now that Phos knows not only that Adamant's holding secrets and withholding information, but also that the Gyms have all known this as well and kept it from Phos. Like, I can imagine Phos feeling bad about that because Phos is like, well, did you not trust me? Did you not think I could know that? Why didn't you tell me? And it sort of feels like a betrayal for Phos. And Phos is like, I want to know the truth. Oh, I love that shot of just the cracks in their veneer and the gold melding it together. And they're like, I need courage to confront the master about it. But it's always courage. How much is it going to take? Oh, and then the gold dripping through them. How much? Oh, the idea of the gold, like, just entirely encasing them and exploding out of them, like, the courage in that moment kind of felt like whenever Anarcticite was being killed and Phos was taking all that gold out for the first time to try to fight back. Like, it feels like Phos is like, I want to fight back, I want to be strong, but this is going to take so much out of me to do so. What was it that I even wanted in the first place? Ooh, that part is so creepy because it's like Phos's eyes going back to that half slanted state. What was my purpose in the first place? What do I want? So that kind of goes back to this idea with Phos. Back in episode 1, Phos was very innocent and just wanted a purpose, wanted something to do and to be accepted by the other gemstones. But that has changed significantly over the course of this series. Now Phos is kind of jaded and grieving the loss that they've had, and they seem to be going through different purposes, such as protecting the other gems and living up to Anarcticite's mission. They've kind of taken those things on and they've become accepted. But now the thing is, if they question the status quo, are they going to throw all of that? Are they going to throw all of that into the blender? Because essentially Phos is like, well, now I'm working with other gemstones. I'm being able to protect them. I did what I wanted originally. I have a job now. That's what I wanted. That's fine. I've been accepted by the other gems. I feel wanted and I feel belonging. But now it's like all this truth is out there. If I question that truth and I bring this up and I gather all this courage, what's the effect of that going to be? Because Phos is like, I gathered up all that courage to try to save Anarcticite and it didn't work. So if I gather up all this courage to question the master and get all these answers, is it going to work or is it going to just destroy everything I've worked for? And what do I even want? So it's just like Phos asking existential questions. And then they're just covered in gloop. Ugh, like they just had like a brain explosion. But then they go back towards the ominous castle and everybody is there in their robes, like next to Shiro. Not the master though. He's just kind of sitting there as all the gemstones are like, it's basically like they just sat in a sauna or under a, they sat under a, oh, what am I trying to think of? It's the table that you put your hands and legs under, yukatsu, maybe? You all know what I'm talking about. So Phos is about to question Adamant about what's going on. And then everything warps. They're about to question the master and be like, they want to know everything. And just as they are about to question, that's when I love the world bending. It's actually, by the way, this is the end card for this week. And it's that shot of Phos is about to question the master, about to call it all into place. And that's when Anarcticite shows up and the world bends and Anarcticite does the famous, hold on, don't hurt yourself. Don't be hasty. And puts the finger up there and says, don't. And of course they keep breaking apart. And Phos is like, oh, Anarcticite. And they start to break up, you knew too. And yet. And of course Phos reaches for Anarcticite and they crumble and collapse. The thing about it is, it shouldn't be surprising that Anarcticite had faith in the master because they're so devoted to them. But in that moment, it also felt to me like Anarcticite was like coming from beyond the grave to be like, hold on, Phos, don't do anything you're going to regret. because you might get hurt if you don't do this. So we'll see if that was a good choice or not. But yeah, but Shiro leaves the gemstones. I thought that they would try to take him as a trap, but they didn't do that. And then they go back and cuddle around Adamant. And Adamant's like, okay. And they put their hand on them. And then Shiro starts to disappear. Now, Phos says, is it returning to the moon? And Adamant says, no. And we see it like start to turn back into a puppy. In that moment, he seems to have found peace. Yeah, he looks like a dog there instead of a creature. Huh. And with all of the different lights and stuff set up around Shiro, I wonder if it was like some kind of ceremony to get Shiro to pass on, and Adamant just didn't tell the gemstones about it. Because there's like one little petal that's left, like part of Flora, and it seems to like have its spirit inside of it. And then it just kind of wisps away. And Adamant says nothing. And says how is, and just changes the subject like it's nothing. So then asks how working along with Bort is, and Phos is like, oh cool, thanks for changing the subject. And they're like, yeah, Bort's amazing. Everybody should team up with them. And then I love Phos looking at the double. So there are two moons. There are two moons. We've got like a Star Wars situation going on. We have a big green moon, and then we have a blue moon. And then Adamant says, well, what are you going to do? And Phos says, I have matters I wish to pursue on my own. About the Lunarians. I wish we'd gotten a little bit more of how Adamant responded to that, because Adamant has been so keen on Phos not being hurt by Lunarians and being protected by them. I wanted to know what Adamant's reaction was to Phos saying they wanted to do business with the Lunarians. Like, I wanted Adamant to question that and be like, oh, what kind of business? Because I don't know. Phos then says that my only option is to ask the Lunarians themselves, which means Phos wants to get taken to the moon. And I'm like, wouldn't Adamant be strongly opposed to Phos being taken to the moon, considering that they've been strongly opposed to any of the gemstones being taken to the moon so far? So I felt like there was something missing there, but I don't know. Like, if Phos had said, I have my own business and left it at that, I'd been like, okay, well, Adamant doesn't know that Phos is thinking about being taken by the Lunarians. But when Phos was like, I want to ask the Lunarians themselves, then, or I have business with Lunarians, I'd be a little bit curious if I was Adamant. Like, what kind of business with Lunarians? Like, do they think that Phos is just going to keep destroying the Lunarians because that's their goal? Also worthy noting, before I talk about theories, worth noting is that Phos now wants to go to the moon, but that is because they want to know the truth. That's because they want to know the truth. They want to figure out what in the world's going on. What are the Lunarians doing with the gemstones? What are they doing with anything? What is happening? And they want to go find out for themselves. Meanwhile, in comparison and contrasting, you have Cinnabar, who wants to go to the moon as well, but their reason, supposedly, is to go to the moon because they don't care anymore. Because they have these like intrusive thoughts and they just don't feel their purpose anymore. They just want to leave this place and go on their own. So both Phos and Cinnabar want to go to the moon, but for very different reasons. So I don't know if the manga, because I don't know if we're going to get that next episode. I don't know if the manga is going to try and give us like the two of them working together and realizing that they both need to go to the moon and then both go together. I don't know, will next episode end with the two of them getting snatched up to take to the moon and that's the end of the season? I don't know. My theory, before we get into this part here with Pad, is I wonder if Adamant is and I'm going to put new in quotation marks, a new human. Because I wonder if they have the bone and the flesh and the spirit. I wonder if they are a new human that's been fused together and they're like the evolution of humanity. But here's my theory, because we have the Lunarians, they are the spirits, right? And if you look at Shiro like a spirit, they seem to be the spirits of what humans once were, but they're trying to regain themselves, and they're just kind of spirits and ghosts floating around, but they don't have peace. They don't know peace, so they're trying to figure that out. So when Shiro came to the gemstones, Adamant helped them find that peace and move on and pass on, you know, to whatever the afterlife is for them. Okay? But the spirits are trying to steal bits of the flesh, like Varys people, to help them gain back possibly bodies or functions like reproduction, things like that. But they also need the bone, which is the gems. And surprising no one, if the spirits want to get the flesh and bone together, then if they had the gemstones, that's a way for them to become immortal. So then they can't die. They can't pass on. They're just delaying the inevitable, right? So I wonder if there is a small group like Adamant who have forged themselves back. But Adamant might be, you know, Adamant might actually be a nice person and a decent person and realized, oh my God, this is actually terrible. I don't think we should do this. And decided to deflect from the moon, go back down to Earth, gather up the gemstones and kind of hoard them away and be like, we don't need humanity to come back together. Humans are awful. We don't want to do this anymore. Let's not have humanity reforge itself, and instead just try to prevent the Lunarians from gathering everybody up and completing their mission, because he sees that it's not worth it. I don't know. That's a theory. That's a theory. We're going to test that. I was wondering what Rutal was doing, gathering all the very similar colored gems onto the ledge. I thought maybe that Phos was having Rutal make gemstones that were like bait for the Lunarians, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Also, now you have Phos and Cinnabar both meandering around waiting to be taken. That's a coming full circle moment from season 1. Also, all the little yellow butterflies that have gathered around Phos are really cute. I like it, but whenever I see butterflies in anime, I instantly think of, oh, death. That's coming. So yeah, but they all gather around Phos like they're sweet, you know. And then Rutal shows up going to the shoreline to try to gather up the frag. So Daya's fine. They're as good as new. Luckily for Daya, they got cute little plushes, which is good for them. And they're going to the thread shore. Not the cord shore. The cord shore was in one translation, but they call it the thread shore here, to find bits and pieces of Padparadscha. I'm not going to look up that gem because I don't want spoilers, but they've gone there to find little bits and pieces to try to use to revive them. So they apparently worked with Rutal. They had a hardness of 9, and they practically knew everything. But what was the backstory with them? Because this is the first time we've heard of this character, right? So I guess I haven't forgotten about Pad. Interesting. So we find out, as they're mentioned, that Phos is glad they haven't forgotten about them, that Pad was really cool. They knew practically everything. And they're like, yeah, they once fought alongside Rutal. So, and then they pull out this box that they're in. They look beautiful. They look like they're just in there, like the corpse of them. They're in their mourning, and they're all like, their hair is huge, which is beautiful. I love it. A hardness of 9, a toughness just under first class. The second strongest after Bort, almost as old as Yellow. Said he was born with a number of holes in his body. So Rutal's always trying ways to fill in the holes. Rutal maintained him by replacing the missing parts. So it sounds like maybe the gemstone's even acidic and just keeps on like missing chunks of them. And so Rutal keeps like lining up the pieces to replace them. That's how Rutal became such a skilled doctor. But for a long time, he hasn't woken up. That one part of Rutal, just, you can tell Rutal loves Pad because they've gone to this extreme length to bring them back and trying all these different pieces of the gems to see if they'll work. But they're clearly related to Ruby because they find the bits of Ruby and Rutal's like, this will help a lot. And so they carve up the chunks, hoping that they come back. And what does Rutal say there? They say each time he goes to sleep, it gets harder to wake him up again. Interesting. They talk about going to sleep, kind of like what the gemstones have done during hibernation, but in this instance, it's not good. So you have an Arcticite who goes to sleep during the spring and summer because it's too warm for them to stay in one piece, and they come back in winter. And now you have Pad who keeps losing parts of themselves and has to get replaced, but each time you get replaced, it gets harder to bring them back. And Rutile's trying to keep that from being a thing. So yeah, interesting. But yeah, and then there they are. That box and everything looks so beautiful. Like all that hair. Oh my gosh, it's insane. And then they start to wake up. Herm. What do we do with that? What do we do with that, you might ask? Well, the good news is I'm going to read the manga. That's the good news, because there's no way we can end next week and be done. There's no way. There's no way. I did say this before. Please do not spoil the manga. Do not tell me like parts. Some people have tried to be like, they were trying to tell me something about chapters, and I ignored those comments. I was like, no. I was like, I'm going to figure it out for myself. Don't worry. You can tell me after the fact in the comments. Just be patient. Wait for after we get to those chapters, after we get to those points, and then you can talk about it. And I would love to read it and respond to it. But if you try to tell me before I even get to it, I'm not going to read it. So save your breath. So save your carpal tunnel. But anyway, I don't know what Pad coming back and waking up next episode in the season finale is going to do. I don't know what Phos is planning to do, if the Lunarians are going to show up. Or they made the point of saying that because Shiro was such an anomaly that it may take a while before they show up again, but who knows? Who knows? So that leaves us a lot of questions to think about moving forward. But yeah, I'm super excited for next week, but I'm really sad it's the season finale of the anime because I've enjoyed the anime so much. But with that being said, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah. I'm back next week with more of the season finale and more of Land of the Lustrous.